Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, claro que sí.
Claro que sí. Okay, so hello everybody. This is Rocío and one more time from Desde la Cima, a podcast that invites all the time amazing people, amazing Latinos who are doing fantastic things in this country and around the world. And today is not an exception. Thank you, Sean, for being here today with us.
Of course, I'm excited.
Okay, Sean, let's start with talking of everything is going to be about you today. And as you heard, this is a podcast where we invite amazing Latinos. What makes you an amazing Latino?
Wow. What a loaded question to start right off the bat. I think I don't know if it makes me amazing, but I think kind of my unique perspective as a Latino really comes from growing up biracial. My father is 100% Mexican and my mother is white. And even growing up, I grew up in a fairly conservative, like suburban enclave. So it wasn't until much later in life that I really came to understand my identity and embrace it and lean into it quite a bit. And so that has been probably what's been most interesting, even as I've advanced in my professional career.
Mhm.
I still have very fair skin. And so I know misgendered is a word, but I guess I am misraced sometimes, which I mean, at this point doesn't really impact me, but it is an interesting thing, reflecting back in hindsight on the privilege that I have had and have acquired and have utilized in my life because of my appearance. So it's not really an answer to the question, but I think it provides a unique perspective. Um, Really, since adulthood, I've been able to lean into my Latino identity and culture and find a way to more embrace it and celebrate it, um, as opposed to how when I grew up it was really otherized.
I know, and I want to talk about that. But before we continue, I had the privilege to meet Sean at the LLI, the Latino Leadership Institute.
Yes.
So that talks about your desire to go deeper into the meaning of being Latino. And you were describing it is you decided to lean in into that. That makes me think that it was hard, that it was a decision, and that you had to make the conscious decision that others don't have that privilege. Because for us, because of our skin color, because of our accent, we are immediately recognized as
Yes.
Latinos. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Um, I mean, it's definitely kind of an ongoing, you know, I would say daily challenge. I mean, probably not as
Mhm.
much as other intersecting identities, but, kind of vacillating between, am I Latino enough? Am I Latino presenting enough? Or am I wide enough? I'm not wide enough to necessarily fit in the full kind of Anglo-European, not Latino enough, especially visually to fit in. Back when I used to be more fluent and bilingual in Spanish, when people would hear my last name, people would tend to assume, oh, so you must have grown up speaking Spanish in the home. And it was, no, any Spanish that I've learned to speak and even my current decent comprehension is all learned in school.
Mhm.
I never grew up speaking Spanish in my home. And so I think even prior to the LLI, but especially going into LLI, I was really looking forward to having the Latino identity centered, as opposed to otherized, and just kind of like, oh, let's go ask the one diverse person about blah blah blah. It was kind of like, yeah, we're all Latino in some degree, some fashion, various roots, ethnicities, and stories. And that's just that. We don't have to doesn't have to be the sole factor or
Mhm.
kind of the unique identifier. And there definitely is privilege,
Mhm.
that I think if you had asked my younger self, I probably would have gotten very defensive. Like, I don't have any privilege. My life is hard. But like looking back now, like I know, yeah, like I'm able to really lift out and kind
Mhm.
of step back from the Latino identity I guess when it suits me or when it's comfortable.
When did you realize that being Latino was a thing?
It probably, hmm,
Because before it is this, and the privilege that you're mentioning, it is also like being able to fit in school and just navigating without any problem. But when that hit you, like, oh, I am half Latino. There is this thing called Latino or Hispanic, and I am in the midst of that.
honestly, and this will sound, and I recognize the privilege in this, it's probably when I first graduated from college. I mean, I became somewhat aware through my language acquisition and my
Mhm,
studies of the Spanish language. But even then, kind of in that context, especially in the American public education system,
mhm,
Spanish was more or less just presented as like a hobby, like something you can do so you can
mhm,
like travel and like, oh, shouldn't you be otherworldly? And when I graduated college, which I'll age myself, I graduated before the big recession in '08. I fell into an HR job where I needed to use my Spanish skills
okay.
right away, working with an employee population that was like 55%
Hispanic.
Spanish first language. And of that 55%, maybe 60% were not, proficient readers and writers. And so that really shook it up, not so much in like understanding like, oh, when I think of Latinos, I just, in the workplace, I just think of, frontline workers or housekeepers or whatever. I mean, that's predominantly the population I worked at a college, but just realizing that, it's not just something in passing. There's definitely a whole culture. I think what really hit for me in that first job that I had right out of college, I had to do a lot of translation,
Mhm,
which I miss and I wish I was still fluent enough to do. I've
mhm,
lost that skill, but I learned very quickly that it's not so much about providing, word for word translation. It was a lot of context.
mhm,
And anytime I'd be explaining a very specific idea, I knew going into it that I'd have to provide a lot of examples. Por ejemplo, think of it this way, think of it that way, just because the whole culture is really rooted in family.
mhm.
And how can you provide examples to really clarify that? um, and really provide additional context. So I think, and again, that's very privileged, but I think that's when I really started to realize it's its own unique thing. I mean, even growing up, I still have family in North Denver and in Greeley, but we only visited them like on occasion.
Mm,
My whole life was really surrounded by my white family and like
got
the
it.
holidays and all that stuff. Like it's even only in the past 5 years I've leaned into Dia de los Muertos,
Mhm.
and I'm actually learning some of like my old family recipes because it was not something that was prominent or
Uh-huh.
really brought up in my upbringing.
So, how about who is Mexican? Your mom, your dad?
My father,
Ah, your dad. That's why your mom pulled you more
yes,
into the white
yes.
culture. So, what happened with the Mexican traditions when you were growing up?
They kind of just lived pretty siloed.
Mhm,
Like I think a lot of the Mexican traditions that I can still recall very fondly in my childhood were mostly around food.
mhm,
So making recipes that my grandma used to
right.
make, making tortillas and salsa and that kind of stuff. But it was pretty limited. Like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. I guess really
Mhm,
other than my
mhm.
last name, like I never really,
That's your only connection or cultural connection.
and even more so, I would say probably even when I was like starting to apply for college, um, and like having, later in high school, having to do like a bunch of demographic stuff, right? Actually had to start checking a box to be like,
Uh-huh.
oh wow, like, yeah, this is a part of who I am. And it's for whatever reason is something that hasn't, I don't know if it's been neglected, but definitely wasn't something that was promoted
Mhm,
in a certain
mhm.
sense.
Interesting. But this is not this invitation is not just to talk about we are at the Hispanic Heritage Month, but it's not about that. We just I don't know why we jump right into it.
Deep conversations,
Exactly.
como usual, como you.
Exactly. Let's just start. We are not at the class at the LLI class, so So it's more to talk about you, Sean. Tell us about you. Tell us about where did you go to college? What did you study? Why?
So I went to college at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Are you Coloradan?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm a native Coloradan. My father's family, his generation is native Coloradan. My grandmother, they're from New Mexico,
Got it.
and then probably a couple generations back are from Oaxaca. And then my mother's family is all, pasty white from Europe.
From Europe.
So I went to CU Boulder. I studied English literature, which at the time, especially when I graduated right at the start of a recession, like I mostly did it because I like to read and it was really easy for me to write. Um, the benefit of hindsight as a working professional, I'm glad I can write really well because I know a lot of people, even lawyers who I work with now, I probably shouldn't say that out loud, who cannot write very well.
I know.
I'm always like, ooh, you're a
Like when you are reading them, like, oh,
boy.
okay, you can use my help.
But I know it was something that was always very important to me to maintain studying Spanish in college as well. At the time, CU didn't have a Spanish minor. They do now. I probably would have qualified for it, but I just wanted to keep those skills because it seemed important and valuable, and it really was at the time when I fell into my first job.
So what was your first job?
So, like I said, I graduated right at the start of the recession in December of 07. And I was working in like events planning on campus. And I went to my boss. I was like, hey, like I'm graduating, like this is a tough time to find jobs. Like, do you know of any leads or something? And my boss at the time, Debbie, she was like, oh, well, like I don't have a need for anyone, but like let me call my friend Patty who works in HR. And Patty, who works in HR, happened to have a need for a temp. And so it started out just kind of, pretty basic answering phones, administrative filing. And my boss at the time, who's still one of my dear friends, Maria, um, she was fluent in Spanish and had kind of worked, kind of developed that area of the human resources operation, which is more like employee engagement, organizational development. And one day she happened to be away or she happened to be in a meeting or something, and someone came to ask for help. And I was like, oh, ¿cómo puedo ayudar? How can I help you? And then once it became clear that I knew Spanish and could speak it pretty fluently, that then I was just kind of roped into a lot of that stuff. Because like I said, at the time, the workforce was at least 50% Spanish speaking as the primary language. So that was very eye-opening. And even when I talk about privilege, I think it can be kind of used in a negative context or a negative connotation, maybe about being able to lift away or separate. But it was in that first job, like those first 2 or 3 years, like where it's just I was surrounded by the culture, I was hearing the language every day, I was using it every day, and also really felt like I was using my privilege and my access, my ability to make a difference in lives of frontline employees. It's shocked me and still shocks me to this day. At the time, internet was, I don't know if it was novel, but like everything was, if you need this, go on the internet. If you need this, go to this website, print this form. And like when I think of the countless workers who I helped and interact on a daily basis who, they may be logged onto a computer once a month. They never,
or they don't even have a computer.
They have no concept of what email is. And
website.
Then we're saying, oh, if you want to look at benefits, yeah, just go to the website. How are we serving them and how are we helping them? And I'm sure since I've stepped away from that direct Spanish interface, and as I know the world just become more automated, I'm sure that divide has only gotten greater. But that's something that has definitely stuck with me in the back of my mind, just as I think.
So is that when you realize that you were privileged? Because that's a word that is not common to see people to understand their privilege and to know what privilege means. So is that when it hits you and say like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I don't think it's even necessarily privilege as like, oh, I'm working in an office and they're not, but just more like, I have access to all these resources, like going online and sending an email or doing whatever on the internet, like I grew up with that.
That's easy.
Whereas there's a whole generation that doesn't do that, and then or I wasn't familiar with that, and then even so, everything is mediated in English, and even again going back to the translation piece that I got very comfortable and familiar with during that job, like it's not just a matter of just like plugging it in Google Translate. Like you need a lot of context clues. You need a lot of ways to aid in comprehension. I remember it was so funny as I think back to those times when, I'd be translating. So there'd be most often a white leader or administrator speaking, and we do the translation, and the translation would always take longer. And
of course,
it's the nature of the language. Spanish has a lot more words, but then sometimes the speakers would be like, I feel like you're saying so much more than what I'm saying. I'd be like, yeah, because that's what the language is rooted in. It's por ejemplo, think of this, or it's like this, or it's like that, and trying to make those connections. So that's where I definitely became aware of the privilege and just so how much of our world is really focused on a white-centric, English-speaking mechanism. I don't know. That's how the world structure. Yeah, that's how the world is driven. That's how it's set up, and everyone else, you just kind of like sink or swim on your own.
Actually, I was talking to a person this morning, a client, and she was saying when she started her relationship with her partner, how he's American and she's Mexican, and how he used to say like, well, we are here, you need to talk. I don't want you to speak in Spanish. I don't want you to, you have this mode, like Mexican modes. And she was like, well, I'm Mexican. I was born Mexican. I'm going to be Mexican for the rest of my life. So is this a problem? So how we need to fight even that in relationships? Like, yeah, this is my identity. This is who I am.
And that's why I liked about, especially that first and only in-person lesson we have with LLI is not only teaching us to lean into our identities and to celebrate it, but also maybe not necessarily in the same context that I can with my privilege and my fair passing skin and my my upbringing in society, but also being able to step back from that identity a little bit as well, in the sense that when we're the minority, when we're the minority, we're so often otherized. Whereas if you have just a collection or a group of predominantly Latino people or exclusively Latino men and women, it's just like, oh, that's just, just like having long hair. Like it's just there. It's not the defining characteristic, regardless of one's appearance or one's accent or language proficiency. It's just there without having to be, oh yeah, that's the Latino realtor. Oh yeah, that's the Spanish speaking HR guy.
So you mentioned something that caught my attention, and it was knowing and understanding, being able to see the privilege, like I have this privilege, how can I use it? But then when and how, knowing how hard it is, decided that to claim your Mexican side, to claim your Latino side. And why? What for? Because it is a hard spot to be. Yes. It's not an easy spot.
I would say some of it, even without like probably explicitly understanding, probably began in middle school when I had to start studying Spanish. Back at the time, there were like a few languages to choose from, and I knew I wanted to study Spanish, because of my last name and my family, and knowing that at some point I'd want to travel down to Mexico and Central America. So that's probably when it the initial gears started, even if I wasn't necessarily aware of it. But then, it really wasn't until I got out of, for lack of a better definition, got into the real world of earning a living and working for myself and making a job and paying bills, that I was like, yeah, like this is who I am, and in some ways looking back on that with frankly a tinge of regret, because there's so many stories and histories and truths that I know I have on my Mexican side of my family that we just were not we weren't exposed to, or it
Mhm.
wasn't a priority for my family for whatever reason. Like, I certainly
Yeah.
I don't want to seem like I cast blame or fault my parents, because I had a
Child
very,
have
yeah, I had a very privileged upbringing, and wasn't, we're all a product of that. But it's I don't know. I do kind of look back on it
Mhm.
with some regret. Like, I think of, again, going back to, I'll talk about her a lot, 'cause she made a big difference in my life. Maria, my first boss. Like, when I think of, I do have some traditions from my family. Like, my
Mhm.
grandma has this one recipe for rice that I could memorize by heart. It's not even that special, but I know it by heart. You just
Mhm.
call it grandma's rice. But like, when I think of traditions, like, it wasn't until like I was working with Maria that, like, I went to her house one day and we made tamales. Like, that memory sticks out. And then, how cool would that have been to have that memory
From your
from my
childhood.
childhood?
Mhm.
Whereas when we made tamales or anything Mexican or Spanish, or Hispanic, which I don't even like that term, um, it was really otherized and kind of like, ooh, it's so cool and exotic to eat tacos, or full, ooh, we're gonna have enchiladas, as opposed to, we're just having a meal because we're having a meal, and ooh, it's so special.
That's all we have.
Yeah,
We just have
exactly.
tortillas y frijoles.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So what are you doing today? Tell us about your whatever you are doing today.
So, like I said, way back when, I won't say how many years ago, I fell into HR, and I found I really liked it. I'm definitely, well, I'm a people person, so I
You
like being
are.
around people and talking to people and meeting new people and helping people. So it suited me well. I stayed in HR right out of college for maybe 6 years, and then, the typical millennial, I got very impatient. Like, I was like, the HR operation where I was working, I was like, things aren't moving fast enough. We're not doing enough outreach, and we're not doing enough for the Spanish speaking population. So I'm going to go find something else, which I did. And it was outside of HR and definitely away from Spanish. And
Mhm.
again, looking back, it was a pretty impulsive decision. And, it was like mere months after I left that the HR area reorganized around a whole outreach and Spanish language area. That was like, oh, those were kind of my passions at the time. And so, after maybe 3 or 4 years away from HR, I really refocused my career back
Mm.
to HR. I got my master's in HR. I got my certifications in HR. And that's what I do now. I'm in my new job that I've been in for about 6 months, doing HR for a mergers and acquisitions tech-based law firm here in Denver.
Okay. Do you have the opportunity to help Hispanic, the Hispanic community somehow from that position?
We have aspirations to,
Okay.
but not yet. It's an interesting place to be in. So prior to the law firm, I worked in public health, on the
Mhm.
Medicaid side, which I didn't have a lot of like interface with the Medicaid populations, but did a lot of work to support it behind the scenes. And it's a very stark difference, obviously, especially coming into law. It's a very classist profession.
Mhm.
I work with mostly predominantly white
Mhm.
individuals, and like many organizations, and even the governor as well, didn't realize racism wasn't a thing until George Floyd. That's when we started really doing some stuff. And so, we definitely have goals to start making like some actual tangible impacts with our legal work, um, in all kinds of diverse communities. Right now, most of our DEI efforts have been really focused internally, which is all good and dandy, but like, if we're only going to learn about how to improve ourselves, like, then it's just living in a vacuum.
Mhm.
So
And what is that interest coming from? Is it because we are a good number to be targeted, or as many businesses? I mean, many businesses are moving their focus to the Hispanic community just because we are growing in numbers, just because we are becoming more professionals, just because we are becoming good target. That's it. So that's why I'm asking.
I think I think it's kind of a both and. I mean,
Mhm.
we're obviously, as a professional services firm, looking to make money and looking
Mhm.
to generate profit, but you know, the future of work and even in law, everything is different in a post-COVID world. And so how can we maximize what we're doing to really make a bigger impact of what we're doing? I think prior to, we've been very focused on just the insular world of mergers and acquisitions, which
Mhm.
again is fine and dandy, but what can we do to leverage some of that just fantastic legal expertise and knowledge and experience we have? I don't even say to help other communities
Mhm.
because that sounds like we're doing them a favor,
Mhm.
but just to maximize them and to, lend some, for frankly, to lend some of our privilege to them. Um, I think definitely to the point you brought up about the growing market is clear. I mean, that's something that Joelle has hammered into us for
Mhm.
years and years about the growing market, and it's just like that's the future. So
Mhm.
at some point, you have to kind of get on board or get left behind.
Yeah. And when I hear you saying that we are the future, I feel some kind of hope. And I hope that hope is real, that we are the future in a good way in terms of really being developed and starting by with the gap, the salary gap, and just as to mention one of those things. But okay, I want you mentioned something that I want to go deep into, and it is COVID. How was it for you? Because you were working for your previous company and it changed the life of everybody and it affected us in many different ways. How was it for you?
It was very, very challenging. Um, so, to go from working in an HR team where there's a lot of, groupthink and problem solving and a lot of collaboration, to spending large chunks of the day by myself at home.
Mhm.
My husband at the time with his job at the time, he was going into the office almost every day, and so
Even with COVID?
yes, it wasn't until like the very tail end of 2021 or like middle of 2021 that he had to work more remotely. So he was going in almost every day, and so it's just spending
You.
entire days just by myself in front of a
Mhm.
screen. And I would say one thing I've definitely learned through COVID is that I am still quite adaptable, but I am not one who's built for full-time remote work.
And
That's just,
especially because you are so social. I
I'm
mean,
just so
most of
social. I
people.
gain a lot of energy by being around
Mhm.
people, like even thinking in my various careers or different hats outside of my work. If someone says, "Oh, Sean, you need to present tomorrow in front of a 200-person crowd," I'd be like, "All right, like I need to think of what I'll talk about, but like the presenting part, like that doesn't phase me."
Mhm.
And so that's something I've really learned. But then at the same time with COVID, in definitely kind of that freedom and flexibility.
Mhm.
Um, Another challenge that I definitely felt, especially working in the public health space, where like stuff was changing all the time. Like I felt a real challenge to unplug. Like I feel like I was always on, always
That's true.
responding, always available at the drop of a hat.
Of course.
Um, and that was hard. And then I'd say the last way that COVID impacted me was really just more of a desire and kind of that shift to self-care and self-compassion. Like I said, I think the terminology work-life balance is way outdated because it suggests that there should be, almost a 50-50 balance of work and your life outside of work, when in reality, you should be able to find a way to integrate work into your life in whatever way or to whatever degree best suits you.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be 50-50%. So I think that's been interesting. And then frankly, I mean, I haven't really had an opportunity to dive into it yet. It's definitely kind of on my list for goals in 21, or excuse me, we're in
24.
20.
Almost 23.
My God, that's the other thing. Like COVID, I just like lost all perception of time. In 23 or in 24, like kind of digging out and trying to be a little more entrepreneurial, like maybe
I love
doing like
that.
my own LLC or some like consulting work. I I I'd be hard pressed to think it'd be something I'd ever do full time. I mean, maybe I'll eat those words at some point because I like the structure of having a
Mhm.
job, but just like that creativity and like just go out and do it. So for better or worse, the impacts of COVID. Also, we had to move during COVID as well. So we just needed more space. So
Of course, these two, I went through all of that. I almost got divorced because my husband and I were, for the first time after 20 years, we were sharing the same time, space, air for 24/7 for 2 years. It was too much. For the first time, I'm like, why are you? Oh my God. The good thing about that is after 3 months, we were able to really adapt. We had to move to the two different spaces because it was like, he was telling me, you are too loud. I'm like, well, that's who I am. So what?
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I am loud. I am, I know.
You say that, and I just have flashbacks just because in the last reconfiguration we have our backs were to each other. And my husband would be like, are you mad? Are you angry? I'd be like, no, what's going on? He's like, you're typing so loud, you're shouting into your microphone for the meetings. I was like, that's just who I am. I'm a naturally loud person. What do you mean?
We are Latinos. We are
Exactly.
loud.
My gosh, yes.
Yeah. And we are social and we love like to laugh and to talk and long sentences and all of that. So yeah, that was hard for me, and we learned for both of us, and we have to learn, okay, what can we do? So I went to my guest room and I just closed the door. I'm like, fine. And that saved the whole situation, I have to say. Okay, Shan. So if you had your 9-year-old kid in front of you, your own you when you were 9, what did you say to that kid?
I would say, um, it will sound cliche, but expand your horizons. Like, just look beyond. Like, I, I'm very fortunate. I mean, I think it's a gift as an adult. Even though I am done with like formal schooling, I will never get like a doctorate or anything. Like, I can't even. My master's degree is the end, but like I'm still a very intuitive and curious person. Like, if you were to look on my phone, you'd see I spend a fair amount of time on Wikipedia just because as I read things or I see things or I hear things, like, oh, I want to know more. And so I wish I could kind of embed that curiosity to my younger self. Obviously, it wouldn't be as easy as having, the technology at your fingertips, but really being able to explore, because, again, it wasn't until, the tail end of high school, college, when I started to become adult, that I was like, wow, the world is really different outside of this very, I wouldn't say isolated, but definitely protective, suburban, white, Catholic enclave that I grew up in. And, it wasn't a bad upbringing at all, but it was very sheltered. And just to know that other things exist. I would tell myself to keep up on the Spanish. Like I said,
And 1 second, because he's all the time saying like he doesn't have a good Spanish. I promise that I'm a witness. He has a beautiful Spanish, to the point that at some time I kept talking in Spanish and he was following me, and then he's like, I don't have enough words. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, because you were talking like nothing. Like
yes, I understand it really well. I have really good comprehension. I can follow along conversations. I haven't spoken it a lot. So I would say keep up the Spanish, just because it's something that like took many years to build up, and then it took
it is there.
a couple
We can
months.
practice.
Exactly. Duolingo or do something. I would tell, so in addition to expanding my horizons, travel more. I love traveling now as an adult. I love going abroad. I look forward to doing more international travel as we settle down post COVID, and it's just not something that I did growing up. And lastly, I would probably say listen more. I'm a very chatty, I'm a chatterbox. If you don't stop me, we'll be here all day. And as an adult, and especially in the professional world, I've learned to, focus my communication, how I talk to others, and how I communicate with different people. But definitely, I'm sure, numerous times growing up that like my parents or my family was just like, God, this kid will just not
Never
shut
stops.
up, just constantly talking all the time. So I would have told my 9-year-old self just to listen a little bit more.
But did you know that talking, according to the research, is the result of having a really well developed brain, especially when you're a kid? So
I mean,
talk.
obviously, I believe it. So, of course, claro que sí.
Shan, what would you say to all the people out there that are Hispanic in between this edge between I am Hispanic, not Hispanic enough, as you mentioned, not winding up. I don't really fully belong here, but I don't really fully belong here. So what would you say to them?
Um, what a good question. I would say
There are many people who had
yes.
exactly the same situation, really good upbringing. They not good or bad, they weren't able to stay in contact with their culture or the language, or which is and one more time, not good or bad, just but they now they realize, oh, I am Hispanic as well, but not Hispanic enough. And I want to be part of that, but I'm not embraced fully as Hispanic.
I think leaning in
Mm.
to that vulnerability, as someone who does diversity, equity, I mean, I usually call it JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Jedi?
Yeah. I didn't come up with that, but Star Wars fan here, it fits well. As someone who does that kind of work professionally, I always tell my clients, but my employees who I work with that, when you're in that area where you feel most vulnerable, most uncomfortable, that you don't know how to respond, you don't know how to react, that's where you're going to have the most growth. And so, it'd be very easy and it's privileged to be able to step out and slide back to that, that whiteness that you grew up with, but try to find areas and ways to kind of live in that vulnerability, in that uncomfortable space. And then honestly, more than anything, just don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to mess up. I would say that's something that I find a lot, not only in my Latino identity, but even in my queer identity, where it's like, am I doing this right? Am I saying this right? I don't really, I want to be perceived a certain way, but I don't want to be perceived a certain way. Try as best you can to let those judgments and perceptions go, and just try to find a way to be authentic. And I think as long as you approach it, whether it's having conversations or building relationships with people with a really open mind, and being very conscious of, if you growing up in kind of that predominantly white space where other cultures or minorities were exoticized or were otherized, as long as you're very conscious about that and aware, then the way you approach it and learn and ask questions will come across really authentic. Like if you ask questions about, oh, tell me more about this recipe, blah blah, or this tradition, blah blah blah, that your family has, as opposed to, oh, you guys don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo? It's such a big holiday. Like, it's not that big a deal. So like, I don't know if it's coming across right, coming across white. Oh my God. But like, there's a certain way where you approach those things where if you're asking questions, it can come off really tone deaf. But I think if you lean into the vulnerability and being very conscious and aware of what you know, what you don't know, that you can really lean into it. Um, and then, obviously, this is the extrovert talking. Find people, find spaces, find communities. I've been very fortunate, to find a familia in LI. I have a lot of other social groups as well, where I have, a variety of friends and relationships, and that's just really helped lean in and to really celebrate my authentic self, and however I choose to present that.
There are many things that I admire about you, Sean, and I haven't told here on air.
Gosh, kind of make me cry on a Friday morning.
One of those is how easy it's for you to navigate into people, like together, and to build groups of friends, and to. Is that something that you learned? Is that something that was natural for you? That came with you, like part of the package, or how did you develop that skill? Because it's not that easy for me. I really admire that when anytime that I saw you at the LLI classes, navigating like nothing, like a fish, like wow.
I think that it's just part of it is me and just my personality and my desire to be around other people and how I gain energy from that, and building relationships. I do think quite a bit with that, especially from a professional context, really was formed in that first job because building relationships and learning people's stories and situations, so how I can better help them, really made me an empath. Um, and how I'm able to connect with people. Um, one of the I don't subscribe to it exclusively, but there's a billion different personality assessments, and in the Gallup Strengths Quest one of my top strengths is woo, which is winning others over, which is just kind of a fancy way to what you were describing, just being able to navigate relationships. I will say, as I've gotten older and wiser, that I found a way to channel that ability more. I think, especially as a wayward youth, it it hindered me in that I just had kind of a lot of surface relationships and friendships without ever like going deep. And likewise, when I talked about listening more, sometimes I think my talkative nature and the extroversion, if I'm having a conversation with someone, it's just okay, you're talking, and when can I interject to talk more about me? When can I interject to respond? And so it's definitely something I've had to learn to tailor and to maximize and to actually use it to my advantage. And now, um, I'm pretty keenly self-aware of it and when to use it, how to use it. And it's definitely even helped me navigate workplace. Like
Right.
when I was interviewing for my current job, and my coworkers are great and fine. I don't have a negative thing to say about them, but it's predominantly white men. And my now boss at the time was like, how would you imagine navigating that? And I was like, well, I have so much experience in higher ed and navigating egos and navigating different spaces and personalities. And so it's that skill has really helped me being able to approach people and really connect people on an individual level, but then also, help them, help me, help them.
Mhm. I love it. Help me help.
Help me, help them, help us.
There you go. So I am going to ask you the last question because we can stay here talking forever and I've been loving this
Seriously.
conversation. But I know that you're busy. What would you say to all the Hispanic people that are out there and they don't, and we know that it is hard, but we just believe that it is hard. We can't see all the other possibilities. We can't see that there are also people on our side that wants to help us. What do you think they need to hear from a person like you?
I think, again, I'll go back to being vulnerable and asking for help. If there's one thing I've learned over my entire lifetime, um, there's a lot of pride in the Latino community,
Yes.
and seeking help or asking for help, whether it's professional assistance, whether it's seeking resources in mental health or whatever it is that's viewed as a weakness, especially in some of the more machismo cultures or machismo variants, how you want to phrase it. And so knowing you can't do it all, there's, I think each of us, we possess all the skills and tools that we need to, achieve our maximum potential. Look at me, the life coach, saying that. But sometimes you need help doing that. You need help realizing it. And, much in the same way, and I use that analogy all the time, much in the same way, if you broke your leg, you wouldn't try to fix it by yourself. You would try to go to a doctor. Likewise, if you need help in other areas, seek help and try to ask questions and try to ask for assistance. Um, I would think the other thing, again, I'm going to talk about self-awareness, and this again goes back to, helping predominantly Spanish speakers, navigate online. Know that the majority of the world, I shouldn't say the majority of the world, a lot of what we have here in the United States is geared and designed for English speakers who have proficiency in technology, who can read and write really well. That's just where a lot of the society and culture
where we
is.
are at.
That's where we're geared. And so is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I think it sucks. But there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do about that, big or small. But I think having that knowledge and having that awareness that I'm going to need to figure out how to navigate some of these systems and use some of the support and resources um, is a better use of effort as opposed to just being, slamming your fist at the floor like, oh, why do I have to go online and look at this form? Okay, well, how else can it be helped? And I guess the last thing I would say is, you know, go big or go home. Don't be afraid to mess up and to make mistakes. In anything you do, probably unless you're a doctor and you're like operating on people. And almost everything that you do, there's very few things that cannot be undone, or very few things that cannot be fixed. And whether it's from pride, or it's from fear, or it's from, the systems, that are designed to oppress others, people are afraid to step out and take a risk at the risk of failure. But if you accept that you are going to make mistakes and you are going to fail, then I don't know, it's less scary when you have to step outside of your comfort zone.
And I think I love what you're saying in terms of we are really a proud community, and that many times becomes a barrier.
Yes.
So we have to be more humble and be able to ask for help and to know that there are many people out there willing and ready to help. Because we think all the time, white privilege, white supremacy is against us all the time. So we ourselves we create the wall, that wall too. But we can also reach out and know that many people are there willing and ready, and they want to help us and be part of our culture and love us. I have many friends that they call themselves reverse coconuts because they are white on the outside, but they say they are Anglos as they can be. But it's like I love all the cultures. They are really more bicultural that we as Hispanics can be many times.
Oh, that's a very interesting perspective. Yeah, because we can tend to get, and I don't think it's exclusive to Mexican culture or Latin culture about kind of staying with the people that you feel comfortable with and staying with what you know. But of course, I would never make an analogy that kind of culture and strong family upbringing is similar to my white suburban enclave. But it really wasn't until I tried to go beyond what I knew and beyond what I grew up with that there's a whole world outside that, and you have to learn to embrace it, and at whatever comfort level you want. Not everyone has to go, give presentations in Spanish in front of 200 people, which is not what I would do because I don't know enough Spanish yet. But you have to be able to, dip your foot into the pool and at least try to step outside of what you know and who you know.
And I will add to that, if you allow me to push our kids to get into higher education, to push our kids to be uncomfortable and to step into the other worlds. As you say to your 9-year-old Sean, go and embrace the world. Get out of your comfort zone. Get out of the barrio and get to meet more people, more different cultures, Italian, Greek, I don't know, many cultures.
Yeah, and I think that's such I don't know, a United States frame of mind being very ethnocentric, that we are the greatest in the world when
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty great here, I won't lie, but we're a fraction of the whole thing that the earth has to offer. So why limit yourself?
Why don't enjoy all the possibilities and also learn from the situation, the hard situations, because those are going to help us to learn and to say like, okay, to make decisions, right?
Yeah, when you put yourself in enough challenging situations or stepped outside, you'll build some resiliency and be able to really figure out, like in my case, really figure out when to talk and when to listen. And when how to advocate for yourself. And then maybe even if you're able to and have the capacity and agency to advocate for others as well.
Thank you so much.
This has been great. I love this.
It's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you all. Gracias, muchas gracias a todos por estar hoy con nosotros aquí en Desde la Cima. This has been Desde la Cima with Shan, my lovely partner from the Latino Leadership Institute. And please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, you name it. We are there. We are not stalking you. We want you to stalk us. And this has been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Lo mismo. Cuídate.
Gracias, gracias a todos. Bye.
Bye bye.